Here's a thought experiment. If one political decision had gone differently on the Korean peninsula 1400 years ago, the Korean language we hear today might sound nothing like Korean. It might even be more like Japanese, or resemble a Tungusic language from the forests of Manchuria. We talked about the origins of Japanese. Today let's talk about Korean, a language that could have disappeared into the river of history. But first, I want to quickly go through how Korean evolved over time, the parts we are relatively certain about. Why is it relatively certain? Simple. After a state called Silla unified the Korean peninsula in 668, the Silla language became the dominant language, and Chinese characters began to be used more systematically and continuously as the official writing system over a long period. Even though the records don't directly reflect spoken language, they finally gave us a traceable thread of linguistic evidence. We don't exactly know what the language was like back then, but we know this. This is where modern Korean came from. In the mid-7th century, the Korean peninsula was in the Three Kingdoms period. In the south, there were two small states, Baekje in the southwest and Silla in the southeast. To their north was a much larger state called Goguryeo. It posed a constant threat to its southern neighbors, and the two southern kingdoms responded to the threat with very different strategies. Baekje in the southwest chose to cooperate with Goguryeo, and Silla, on the other hand, allied itself with one of the world's most powerful states at the time, the Tang Empire, which was hostile to Goguryeo. In 660, the Tang-Silla alliance destroyed Baekje. 8 years later, in 668, Tang forces defeated Goguryeo, paving the way for Silla to eventually unify most of the Korean peninsula. From that point on, Korean's development became pretty clear. First, unified Silla period. The Silla language became the dominant language of the peninsula, absorbing some vocabulary from Baekje and Goguryeo. Then came the Goryeo period. In this period, the Korean language continued to evolve with a massive influx of Sino-Korean vocabulary, creating a pattern where Sino-Korean words and native Korean words coexisted. And then Joseon Dynasty. In 1443, King Sejong created Hunminjongum, or Unger, an alphabetic system for the language. So finally, Korean had its own writing system. And at last, despite the Japanese occupation in the 20th century and the later split between North and South Korea, the core structure of Korean language has remained intact until this day. This timeline is clear, but here's the real question. Where did the Silla language itself, aka Korean, come from? Scholars have a few theories, but nothing's been proven for sure. Theory 1, a language isolate. This is currently the most mainstream view in academia. Simply put, Korean is a language isolate. It has no known relatives. People who support this think Korean might be a continuation of a language that were already on the peninsula thousands of years ago. It picked up features from neighboring languages along the way, but fundamentally developed on its own. It can't be reliably connected to any known language family in the world. Why has this become the mainstream view? Because all attempts to classify Korean into a language family lack sufficient evidence, and its core vocabulary shows no systematic correspondences with any known language. In addition, all grammatical similarities with other languages can be explained by language contact and don't prove common origin. So since we can't prove it's related to anything, the default assumption is that it's a language isolate, like Basque in Europe and Ainu in Japan. So this theory became mainstream simply because all others failed. Then no connection ended up being the safest choice. Well, as far as mainstream goes, that one sounds pretty lame. But there was a theory that used to be way more popular, though it's now be pretty much sidelined, but still worth mentioning. That's theory number 2, the outtakes theory. This was a go-to theory throughout 20th century, but by the early 2000s, most linguists had abandoned it. People who supported this believed there was this huge language alliance across a vast region of Northern Asia, stretching from Turkey to Japan. It included the Turkic languages, Mongolian languages, and Tungusic languages. Korean could be put into this group too, along with Japanese and the Ainu language. The main evidence was really similar grammar. All of them use SOV word order, subject, object, verb. And they are all agglutinative languages, meaning grammar is built by attaching suffixes to words. Then certain basic words were argued to show patterns of similarity. But why did it get dropped? Because SOV word order and agglutinative grammar are actually quite common across languages, so they are not strong evidence of a shared origin. These features can also develop through long-term language contact. And when you look at the core vocabulary, the connections are way too weak to build a solid family tree. And even the idea of an Altaic language family itself is now questioned. These days, even if scholars are still looking at connections between Korean and Altaic languages, they're mostly thinking about language contact rather than common ancestry. Perhaps the Altaic theory was too broad to follow, so they came up with another theory at a smaller scale. That's the third one, the Asian Buyeo language family theory. This theory says that roughly from the 1st century BCE to the 5th century CE, there was an Asian Buyeo language family in what now the Korean Peninsula and southern Manchuria. The Silla language, ancestor of Korean, was just one branch of this family. This family would have also included the languages of Baekje and Goguryeo, as well as the languages of some other kingdoms or tribes in the area. Well, the problem with this theory is, as you've probably guessed, lack of evidence. This theory relies more on historical connections between these states than on solid linguistic evidence. We don't know too much about Goguryeo and Baekje languages, mainly just place names and personal names. That makes any kind of systematic comparison really difficult. Then at last comes this exciting one, the Japanese-Korean common origins theory. Not just common folks, some linguists also think Korean and Japanese might have some deep connection. The evidence includes really similar grammar. Some place names show potential common origin, and phonological patterns resemble each other. Like I mentioned in the previous video, the Japanese ancestors and the Korean ancestors had hundreds of years of contact on the Korean peninsula. This contact may have created something resembling a dialect continuum. Part of it in southern peninsula, part around Kyushu Island in Japan. Since the Yayoi migration happened from what later became Baekje territory, one view is that the Baekje language has close ties to Japanese. Well, in my opinion, this Japanese-Korean common origin theory sounds logical, but it's got a fatal flaw. If Japanese and Korean was still part of a dialect continuum 2,000 years ago, their differences today are way too big. Sure, their grammars are similar, but they're not that similar. Not enough to support such a recent split. And more importantly, apart from Chinese loanwords, you'll find almost zero cognates between them. Only a handful of words that might be related, and even those remain unproven. If we look at French and Spanish, they both developed from Vulgar Latin over a broadly similar time span. And today they are still considered pretty similar languages. But Japanese and Korean, the differences are far, far greater. You might say France and Spain share a land border, making linguistic exchange easier. But look at the Tsujima Strait. It may have stopped the Mongol forces from conquering Japan, yet for over 1,000 years it never stopped the interaction between Korean and Japanese people. And besides, the Taurine Pyrenees weren't exactly easy for medieval Europeans to cross either. So what does this tell us? Either the two languages are not related at all, or they split way earlier than 2,000 years ago. Either way, this makes the evidence for this theory a lot weaker. So Korean's origins are even more mysterious than Japanese. With Japanese, we at least have a pretty good idea it was brought over during the Yayoi migration. But Korean, we know almost nothing for sure. But that got me thinking about another question. Was today's Korean the inevitable result of how history played out? Based on limited place names and personal names, modern scholars think the three kingdoms on the Korean peninsula, Silla, Baekje and Goguryeo possibly spoke pretty different languages. The Silla language is the direct ancestor of modern Korean, but the Baekje language might have had connections to ancient Japanese, and the Goguryeo language was probably more influenced by northern Tungusic languages. Well, this is far from a concrete answer, more like educated guesses, but still, it's possible. Imagine if things had gone differently. What if Baekje and Silla had swapped strategies, and it was Baekje that allied with the Tang Empire and wiped out Silla and Goguryeo? Or what if Goguryeo never got into conflicts with Tang? Goguryeo was way more powerful. They would have been much more likely to unify the Korean peninsula. Either way, Korean today probably wouldn't be what it is now. I know that there are no what-ifs in history, but who knows? Maybe that the fact that Korean is what it is today is out of pure luck. Well, that's all for today. See you in the next one.